Welcome to React Roundup. I'm Jack Harrington, your host for today. And with me is my esteemed colleague, TJ Van Tol.
Hey, everybody.
And our special guest for today is Adam Berg. Hello, Adam.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, folks, this is Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. And lately I've been working on actually building out Top End Devs. If you're interested, you can go to topenddevs.com/podcast, and you can actually hear a little bit more about my story, about why I'm doing what I'm doing with Top End Devs, why I changed it from devchat.tv to Top End Devs. But what I really want to get into is that I have decided that I'm going to build the platform that I always wished I had with devchat.tv, and I renamed it to Top End Devs because I want to give you the resources that are going to help you to build the career that you want, right? So whether you want to be an influencer in tech, whether you want to go and just max out your salary and then go live a lifestyle with your family, your friends, or just traveling the world or whatever, I want to give you the resources that are going to help you do that. We're going to have career and leadership resources in there, and we're going to be giving you content on a regular basis to help you level up and max out your career. So go check it out at topenddevs.com. If you sign up before my birthday, that's December 14th. If you sign up before my birthday, you can get 50% off the lifetime of your subscription. Once again, that's topenddevs.com.
So, Adam, you were talking about all kinds of things, including a recent article on server-side rendering, which is how we got interested in you. So why don't we start off the conversation by talking about server-side rendering?
Sure. So a bit of the background for why it came up for me. I'm working on an app called Kaizen, which is a music app for incrementally releasing music. And we had the need to, when you share links on certain social media sites like Twitter or Facebook, that you get the nice kind of picture and description that shows up specific to the page that you're actually on, which is definitely not something that you kind of get for free with your standard Create React app. And so it kind of had the site built out and we're ready to go, okay, let's get people using this and sharing it. But if you shared a link to your song or whatever, it would just say, oh, hey, here's the default page title of the thing, which no one's really going to look at that point. It's like, what is this thing? It doesn't exist yet. And so I needed a quick way to bring in server-side rendering without kind of changing too much. And
basically port to Next, I'm guessing.
What's that, sorry?
Well, you could port to Next, which would probably be a big deal.
Well, that'll open up a whole thread of conversation if you want. I'm not the biggest fan of that one, but
okay.
So eventually, I wasn't finding. I pretty much found what you said. Is you Google that, and it's like, well, just use Next.js. And I was like, well, yeah. I already have an app, and I can't imagine it's that difficult to have it just return me the rendered HTML. And so I dug down a little bit, and eventually I said, well, I haven't found anything that's just simplified this for me in writing form. And so I did the work, put it together, and put this article together. And personally, I find that it's not that complicated. You kind of just put together an express route that has your wrapping HTML, and you just slap in your rendered React component using React DOM server, and then you're done. And then you have server-side rendering.
I think the big thing with server-side rendering is like the data prefetch, right? You want to go and if you're going to go and have like a service that you need to talk to on the page, that's going to use your product detail page, for example. You're going to have to hit the product detail API. And a lot of folks, they want to do that on the server side and then kind of render the page so that it's got all the product detail on it, like in the HTML, so that it shows up with Google. But we can quibble about whether that's actually the case anymore, since Google for years now has done JavaScript rendering. And then also on the page. So were you doing any data fetching in this scenario?
In the tutorial, I wasn't, because I just stripped down straight to the server-side rendering. For ours, we definitely were, because we needed to pull like the title of whatever it was, the track or the artist, the image that it was actually going to display. And so, I mean, maybe that's worth a follow-up to kind of show that. But that as well is kind of, okay, you've got your HTML and you just need to make a couple requests to fill in whatever information that you're going to need to populate.
Yeah, I'm kind of struck just skimming through your article, and we'll include this in the show notes too for people that want to follow along, how pretty straightforward actually it is. Because I'm sort of, per your premise of the article, we tend to think of server-side rendering as one of those hard things that you need a big and fancy framework to solve for your app because it's so hard. And there's definitely harder use cases. Like it gets trickier when you get into more advanced stuff. But per your example, if you need something simple, it's kind of nice just to have the option to be able to roll something yourself, or if you have some custom need in mind for your apps. Like, it's not necessarily the world's hardest problem for some of these simple use cases.
Yep. And React was designed to do it. I mean, that was one of the big selling points early on was isomorphic JavaScript, and all of that.
So out of curiosity, since you mentioned not liking Next so much, I'm gonna I'm gonna predict.
I'm curious.
Is it because Next do you think it's just too heavy-handed, like takes over too much, too heavy hosting? I'm kind of curious. I want to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, we can do that. I'd say there's nothing wrong with using it, obviously. And I have not also used it extensively, but I have definitely gone through the tutorial. I've just seen how it works, played with it. But most of it fundamentally for me boils down to just kind of getting stuck in the way that they do things. And like even with React, that is kind of a thing where all of a sudden at some point they're like, oh, hey, hooks are way better. And if you had been using React for a long time, you have a big chunk of code base that's class based. And all of a sudden the world says, cool, nope, we no longer use that. We only use hooks. And then all of a sudden you get a whole bunch of people on your team and they don't know how to use the React code that you've already written. So that's just kind of an example of what I see happen to these kind of like large libraries, frameworks, ecosystems, whatever you want to call them. Whereas I personally like to have good control over how things work. And then you can kind of control and change things without being so stuck in your ways. Whereas Next.js now, everyone who's used it, no one's going to want to change dramatically from there, even if something better kind of arose. And so you're kind of stuck with the initial structure of how you've done things. And then even then they make changes. And it's like, okay, well, here's version whatever, 5.0. And you now have breaking changes and you need to change your entire app just to accommodate what Next.js has changed. Rather than knowing, hey, this is where my app is at. This is the next incremental step I need to make a large improvement. And you have no kind of like dependency on other people using this thing.
Yeah, it's like the classic software development, any sort of dependency you take on, right? The heavier dependency, the less flexibility you have moving forward because you do get quite coupled to it. So then it becomes a matter of, well, am I getting enough value out of this dependency to warrant the lack of flexibility? And it's the classic trade-off because there's no like yes or no answer to that. It's always going to depend on what you're building and your team and everything. So it's just something that trade-off you have to learn over the years and try to make the best call you can for every problem or situation that it comes up.
Yeah. Basically build or buy, right?
Yep.
Just not buy in this case. Free. To a certain degree.
Yeah.
I guess, like you can post it on Versal, but yeah.
Yep.
Well, I mean, the contrasting point that I always see being like a lazy guy inherently is that like if you go and build your own SSR, right? Like I'm sure you did a great job and I'm sure the article's awesome and that's great. Like at the same time, like I can go and pick up somebody who knows Next.js and they know that, right? And they're familiar with how that code runs, whereas your code is custom. And so there is that trade-off as well. Like, is this really the bytes that the code that we want to maintain going forward?
But then I would probably expect that Next.js person on average, because definitely not all of them, doesn't actually really know what server-side rendering is even doing.
Oh, yeah. Well, possibly.
Which is something that I would kind of like to see a lot more of, especially kind of in front-end JavaScript land, of just people like really understanding what's happening so that they know what's available to them. And that's where I find these kind of like libraries just like hide a whole bunch of kind of like fundamental knowledge. So again, like it's not saying don't use this at all, but I think I'm more on the make sure you kind of like understand what's happening underlying before you pull something in and just use it and think that, oh, well, this must be doing so much stuff, when sometimes maybe you just need a simple, small aspect of it.
It's the old maxim: understand the code that you're putting into production.
Yeah,
100%. But the same, I don't know if you've run into this, but I actually ran into some folks recently, or just here and there, where like I write in Next, and I'm like, well, what about and they're kind of like, well, it's not React. I'm writing in Next, or I say, how about using Next? And they're like, no, I want to write in React, and it's like, wait. React is, wait, hold on. Like Next is built on React? Like I'm lost on that, but whatever. Have you seen people like?
So I think it always comes into the specific project, because sometimes I think it's important to know that, and sometimes it's just important to ship something quickly, right? Like, because I've also had sites where I just need to spin something up to do something, and I don't care what it's doing under the hood, right? I have a problem and I need it solved. And sometimes I'll use platforms that purposely make me not care about those details, versus if I'm building something that's for sure going to stick around for a while, right? If I'm doing anything for like a corporate job or anything, then that equation gets flipped quite a bit. And chances are I'm going to want to put some time and effort in understanding what things doing and not necessarily throw it out just haphazardly. So it's also the team you're working on too, because I've also worked on teams where I know for a fact that people that are going to be working on this app are totally not going to understand the underlying details, right? Sometimes big enterprise jobs, you just have new people coming in all the time, people that are less talented or knowledgeable, and you have to sort of be able to account for that. Sometimes you want to protect people from doing too much low level stuff too. So it always depends.
Yeah, I'd also maybe throw in there just that it kind of feels like a trap, for lack of a better words, in terms of where Vercel is headed. To me, it's almost scary having like $300 million of funding behind an open source framework, because you're like, what's the play here? Like you know what it is. It's their hosting option, but from there, what happens? And it's just kind of the control over that is potentially future scary.
Yeah. So they're also totally going to get into like a bunch of different frameworks. I think they're also doing I know they're backing Svelte, I want to say. They got the guy from Svelte in there. So it's more than just React.
It's totally weird. I feel like we could even have an entire conversation around like the VC funded open source, how crazy that's gotten in the last handful of years. Because you cannot make a coherent argument to me that justifies the amount of money that Next.js has, because I see some future that they can make money from hosting, but it's not like their hosting is fantastic. And you can host Next.js apps like anywhere. Like we have Next.js apps at Blues, and we're not hosting them with Vercel, and we're not paying them anything. And I know lots of other people are doing that as well. So I don't know. I find it staggering the amount of money that's coming in, and how that's going to affect the future of some of these frameworks is something that, at least in like the front end world, we really haven't had to deal with much at all. Like the VC money that's pouring in is somewhat of a new phenomenon.
Right.
Yeah, there's also like Redwood JS just got, I think, a bunch of money, and they're doing some interesting things too, because they're actually like funding startups, which is kind of cool. And there's also Remix. Taurus, they've got a lot of money, or got some money as well. So
some of the companies in the tooling space have gotten some money recently. I'm trying to remember exactly who, but there's some money.
Deno just got money.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, right. And Deno's got. Oh, they had a new framework come out just recently too.
So yeah,
and I think
that realm of things is interesting.
Yeah.
I really should try the Deno React thing again, because it's been a while and it's cool. I mean, I do like Deno. Have you tried it out?
I haven't. It's on my list. Yeah, just haven't crossed that border yet.
I mean, you're not doing enough right now. You can
there will probably be an article pretty soon about that one.
So we've talked a bit about frameworks, and I know one thing you've told us is that you're also working on a big like Angular to React conversion as well, which I know we have a lot of listeners that are either in that situation or in companies that are considering that sort of thing. So I'd like to hear your story behind that. Maybe you could just quickly like sort of set the stage for us.
For sure. Yeah.
On like what sort of thing you're working through right now.
Well, we kind of skipped the formal introduction. So I'm currently VP of engineering at Dubsado, and this is where we're facing this transition from AngularJS, to be clear, not Angular.
Okay.
The other one, whichever number it is now,
right,
to
18.
React.
Whatever.
And so I started pretty early there as kind of like first employee, maybe 6 years ago. I can't keep track of time. And my brother had kind of set the stage for how things were initially built. And that had been in AngularJS. I believe should have been before React was even there, or maybe like React had been born in some small corner of the world and hadn't really exploded to what it is now.
Yep.
And I got in there, learned it, did the tutorial, and we just started pounding out new stuff, and no questions about anything, because we both knew it. It was good enough. We were getting stuff done. We're building a product. Like you said earlier, just get it done. Making stuff doesn't matter. And then maybe a few years, even maybe a little bit more, it became pretty clear that React is kind of going to emerge as the one that, oh, hey, this is what people are learning. This is what people want to use, etc. And then you have kind of the explosion of coding boot camps that are teaching people specifically React. And so then you can now have a person who's already learned this thing and hire them with that experience. And they've learned patterns, they've learned whatever else specifically for that. And so the people that we had at the time, we were a small team, maybe 5 at that point. We all knew AngularJS, but if we were going to scale the team, there's no hiring an AngularJS developer. There might be, but it's a lot more difficult. And so we're kind of faced with a bit with that struggle. And then as well, some of in general, some of the ways to use AngularJS is a bit weird. But then you layer on top of that just the technical debt of trying to build things quickly. And you've got a bit of a mess on top of a framework that people are maybe not going to know. And so, it's like the new people I talk to bringing onto the team, I have to let them know, I'm like, with AngularJS, there's kind of a lot of magic that occurs. And if you don't know that magic, if the code is even slightly confusing, it makes no sense, because there's just whatever attributes on HTML elements that aren't really HTML elements, and they're just doing random crazy things.
Oh, yeah. Right. I forgot about that.
So that's kind of what leads us to the motivation of saying, okay, well, I think we do need to consider what bringing React in looks like. And that kind of stayed in the do we do it, do we not do it situation for a reasonable while. And then I don't know if I think I experimented with it just outside to see if we could just bring in React on top of everything else and just kind of start floating some new components. So we could just decide, instead of saying, yeah, we're committed to this decision, it was more of, hey, if we can just build some new stuff in React, we can better decide, is this the way that we want to move forward? And so we used Angular to React, which is a library that basically allows you to create an Angular component that just wraps your React component. And we started replacing things from the inside out. And if anyone's thinking about it, I would highly suggest the route, because it really gives you some time to explore it without just fully committing. Like, we have a pretty large front end aspect of our app. There's not no way, but it would be a very long time before we said, hey, cool, we have an entire React thing. We redid everything.
Yeah.
And so that even now, like, we're still running that, where we're running this in between, where we've got probably more than half of our app still in AngularJS. And then all of our new stuff is currently being built in React. And what I've found is all of your old code pages, if they were working before, they're still working now. Like, there's no reason to change it. It works, does exactly what it used to do. And the problem that I wanted to solve is, hey, okay, anything new we're writing, we have these new people and they don't know how to use it. And so now they can work in an environment that's mostly familiar to them. We teach them kind of the glue layer and say, hey, yeah, this is this little bit of a weird thing, but here's a way to create an Angular component out of a React one.
Is the library's name React 2, like the number 2 Angular, just to make sure I got it right? Oh, interesting. Because I had not heard of that before. And I've done a lot of stuff covering different transitions. So I'm glad to hear that's working for you. But it makes sense. One theme, because we've covered sort of transitions of various sorts. I think Angular to React is probably the most common one. And I think a recurring theme is that, to your point, the best way, you have to come up with some sort of migration plan that's gradual if you ever want to get this done, because like, you can't just sit down and drop everything and say, okay, for the next 3 months, we're going to rewrite everything and then try to push it out in one go, because that's just setting yourself up for failure and frustration and all sorts of other problems. But I had not heard of this library before, so I'm just looking around, and we'll make sure to toss this in the show notes as well.
Oh, that's very cool. I mean, the big e-commerce companies I was at, like, we would go and do route by route shifting, so you'd have like the /checkout route you'd go and have the entire app route and you render everything, and then you'd go and take like Akamai or something and say, oh, no, for checkout, go and send it here. And then you make an app that was just specifically checkout, and it was entirely React, right? And where the old one was jQuery or whatever. And as long as you could handle the same cookies and manage the same identity, it didn't really matter all that much. But again, you'd have to go and shift over everything. You have to make a whole new version of the header that was exactly the same pixel perfect representation of the jQuery header. And it was just a blah.
Yeah. So we actually have almost 2 more strategies, I would say, on top of that. So we started with this React to Angular as, again, kind of like test ground of, do we kind of more commit to this? And then we've recently been rebuilding we're kind of like a client management system. So people can send out forms and invoices and stuff to their clients. And already, even in Angular, that external client facing app, we had separated out into its own individual app. But it's a much smaller app, which is why we did it. And we wanted to load faster, etc. But that gave a really clear opportunity for, hey, just like you said, we can chop this off and say this entire thing is just its own app.
Right.
And so we've just recently released our first portion of that as, okay, cool, this is just a React app. And we just take the URL that's being requested and say, okay, cool, this is all good. This is just a React application. So that's one other strategy. And then again, recently, we've come up with what I hope is kind of the last layer of complication in this transition is, so we wrapped our Angular stuff in React, which has been fine for kind of placing from the inside out. But we've now taken it the opposite direction, where we've wrapped our Angular app in React. And so that React can then control the routing. And we can then start moving our routing and everything into React and basically have a pass through that says, hey, if this isn't a React route, just send it straight to the Angular app. And then the Angular app kind of initializes itself
just
that way.
Manages all the DOM from there down, and you're like, don't mess with it.
Yeah.
Treat it like it's sort of a D3 component or something.
Yeah.
So are you then converting like a route at a time sort of thing? Is that the idea for for putting React in control there?
Pretty much. So as soon as because pretty much you have a one-to-one relationship between a route to a page. And so when you go and do a page, that page becomes React. Everything below it should become React. And then you point your route to that new React page.
Okay. Yeah, because I imagine probably the trickiest part of all of this is getting the routers to not compete with each other. So I imagine there's some fun in making that sort of thing work as well. Because AngularJS, is it just at that point, do you just not have any routes registered in AngularJS? Like React just controls all of that and then controls the delegation from there?
Pretty much. If I remember correctly, basically, if you're on a React route, the Angular stuff just isn't loaded at all.
Yeah.
Right.
And then if it isn't a React route, then we bring in Angular, and then it's kind of like you're saying, like a React router. If you don't have a route, here's the other thing that you do. It's just that other thing is an entire Angular app that also handles routing. There's definitely a couple glue pieces, but so far it doesn't look too bad.
I imagine those can create some very fun to debug moments. You screw something up.
Well, it works. It works. Probably that's one of those things where it either works 100% or it doesn't work 100%, and you're done.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Which is almost easier to deal with. It's when it only works 50% of the time that's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, it's a spa, right? Like it's a single page app as you're rolling around. Okay, so that does actually add a bit of complication there because you got you're doing all your router.push sort of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, folks, I'm here with JD from Raygun. JD, I mean, it seems like a lot of things these days are kind of pushing us more toward productivity, right? We install VS Code extensions. We do CI/CD. We kind of get this stuff off our plate, automate as much as we can, and move quickly. And one of the tools that I tell people to get is something like Raygun. Do you want to just explain real quick how Raygun can help with the productivity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's several-fold. I like to think of Raygun as almost being like a full-time engineer on your team that's keeping an eye on things and is able to report the important faults or performance bottlenecks so that you aren't guessing. And so that's one element. But then to that point where we store is all of the data we possibly can on the context of the error or performance issue, so that we integrate with source control systems. You can jump into our APM and get method level timing details with the source code right beside it. So if you're looking at it going, why is this page so slow? You can usually just eyeball the code right there and then. So speeding everything up, which I think is really important with, our industry is under so much pressure right now.
Yeah.
We've got to try and get people being more efficient because we're not going to have a whole lot more people suddenly.
Right, absolutely. And I love that idea. I've done plenty of optimizations myself, right? And having an APM tool that will actually say, this is the slow code, right? So instead of me trying to guess or look at it and go, oh, do I have an N+1 query here? Yeah, it just tells me where the problem is. And that's really powerful in something like Raygun or...
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of Iron Man. And the idea is that I would love a virtual Jarvis that's just going, hey, there's this thing. Do you want me to go fix this? Do you want me to solve that? It's like, that's what we need to get to.
Yep, absolutely. Well, if you want the next best thing, go to raygun.com. It's not Jarvis, but it will tell you where the problem is so you can go fix it. You can get a free trial right now if you want. It's raygun.com.
Do you have any other tips from the process that you would recommend to people having gone through this? Like anything in terms of how you structured it or other things to include it, or like things with how the team approached it, like how you divided and conquered? Just any other recommendations you have?
Probably lots. Definitely. And this depends on your size, but even above like 5 pages, I would probably suggest incrementally adopting it for one, because for sure the number of problems we would have introduced would have been a lot. And as well, it's now a bunch of AngularJS people building React something or others. And so what you first start writing isn't necessarily the best React code that you really want. And so you don't yet have the conventions. And so give yourself time to come up with the conventions rather than you go and full convert everything and then realize, oh, actually, I want all these other conventions. And now you have an entire app not following conventions. So there's that. I think one of the other challenges I say is kind of the data fetching, because we had all of our data fetching through Angular services.
Mm-hmm.
And I would put this, I guess, as some advice, particularly in the incremental adoption stage of we basically created a global function to import Angular services, which sounds a bit wild, but if you like really boil it down, an Angular service is just a like function. And so if we had a service that fetched things from the API, we could just grab the service through Angular and then use the exact same one, which limited how much code we needed to rewrite. And if our services are doing some weird things, which some of them were, whether it's caching or whatever, it all stays consistent. And so it's frustrating at times, but still kind of accepting that you're within the framework, I think helps to make sure that you're not breaking things along the way. And then once you kind of have the React side of things settled down a little bit, then you can focus on, okay, well, if we were to remove this completely, how do we want that to look? So kind of just trying to tackle problems and questions one at a time is maybe what I'd boil that down to.
Cool. How about unit tests? Has that been...
So that's my philosophy for now, which I think will change as we get a larger team, has been to focus primarily on end-to-end tests rather than unit tests. And that's actually been a saving grace in multiple ways, because you're then testing the system from just kind of like the DOM perspective. And I think it's helped show us that some of these things actually work, because we have almost, I think, 10 of them just kind of like going through the app and being like, hey, does anything explode?
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. And it's being abstracted from the framework. Like you said, it just gives you like tests to make sure everything's, in theory, if you have a really good set of end-to-end tests, it kind of is your validation that you're doing the conversion correctly. So yeah, it's very cool. What are you using what tools are you using for end-to-end tests? Do you have any like recommendations, things you like using, or?
We're on Protractor. which I can't even remember, but I feel like was an AngularJS specific
I
one
think
back in the day.
Yeah, it was like
Yeah, I'm
Google,
looking
and
at
it was kind of coupled with Google. I remember going to like a talk about it, and it was like all Google Angular kind of stuff.
Which is fine, and I say that very tentatively.
Yeah, you really sold that.
It's more I don't know what I would necessarily switch over to yet, and that's not where any of my attention is currently because it works, but there's just been numerous problems with it where waiting for things to be done and to be clicked or changing web pages just didn't really work. Right. And so we have certain ones that just got so complicated. And then as well, the way that it deals with promises, I think got baked in after the fact. And so sometimes it just doesn't work. Or if an error gets thrown in a certain way, the whole test loses track of it because you have to call next. And then you're stuck, like your test has to time out because it never finishes. And so all kinds of problems. And then as well, the I don't even remember what it is, but updating the Selenium drivers, I think that's what it is. Just we had problems across our CI and then locally. It's kind of like anytime somebody went to install this, even with instructions that are like, hey, find your version of Chrome, specify this exact version, just was far too difficult, more than I think it should have been.
I think some of the newer ones take care of that, and a couple of different things. They're better at waiting and all that sort of stuff. But it's still one of those things with the end-to-end test where they're just so flaky. It's like, I remember at Walmart, we had this system where basically we would run a whole bunch of EDE tests, and it was only on the third time when they didn't pass, we would actually say, yeah, that didn't pass, because they're just so flaky. It's like, we just give them 3 times and maybe it'll work. And if it works at any point in there, you're good.
Yeah, we're so flaky. We're using Cypress at Blues, and I mostly have good things to say about it. It works quite well, but it's the same sort of thing. I think it's like, it's an inherently hard problem, I feel like, is part of it, because you're testing something with all sorts of asynchronicity or whatever the word is built into it, right? You got to wait for things to load. Things might not be there. But yeah, we run into problems where sometimes it just randomly, the CI will fail a build saying it couldn't find this header. And then you're like, how could you not find that header, right? Like that's it's right there. And then you just rerun it and it works just fine. Yeah, so there's still, even with a tool and a tool chain that I think is quite good and that we like, we still fight it regularly. So I don't know. We still, I feel as an industry, don't have like a magic bullet, great solution to this. So, right. Yeah.
No, it's tough because like I've definitely seen code bases where it's like 100% unit tested, and it's like, but what are you testing? Like, if you're doing like snapshots on a button component, really? Like, is that like, what is that? Like, why would it fail? And I'm sure it runs fast, I guess, but like, it makes your code seem very like rigid. Like you're just, I changed one tiny little thing, and next thing I know, I'm breaking like 100 unit tests because, oh my God, snapshots didn't work. And so everybody's just like, update snapshots all the time, and nobody cares, right? So it's always passing, but what are you really testing? And then on the other side, end-to-end testing is just so kind of brittle and slow, and so you end up like grid vendors and things like that to like make it faster. Oh God, it's a mess. Yeah, there's really I've seen really good solutions.
Yeah, but I found what I'd slowly like to do is we currently require our end-to-end tests to pass before we can deploy, but I'd probably remove that condition, but you still kind of like have a clear indication of did it pass or not. So you have to say, oh, I know that this is that flaky error. It's fine. Because it has most definitely caught things. And I think that's what it's extremely useful for, is when you're like, yep, 100%, this page just didn't load and I have never been to that page.
Do you actually call prod services, or do you mock everything?
It runs a full backend server. It runs the whole thing and makes requests, creates users.
But it's like known good data or something, at least like that.
It creates its own data through it. So
right. Okay. So it's okay. That makes sense. Yeah. I think actually mocking that adds a level of stability in that, like, you're at least not like making the calls, but then again, you don't really know. And
getting back to the trade-offs, it's like classic software.
It depends.
It's classic software development. So, Adam, you have a lot of different stuff you've written about recently. So maybe we could just do a little bit of like a lightning round here, because I'm just curious about some of these. So you've written about switching out Webpack and create React app with esbuild. So I'm curious, maybe you could give us like the TLDR, the short version of that one, and like what brought that up and like why you wanted to share information on that.
Yeah, so the hopefully short version is that Webpack production builds blow my mind how slow they are. Like even just a normal create React app, you've got maybe 7 seconds to do a production build. But that's maximum a megabyte of JavaScript getting converted. So what's happening? But then you throw in the fact, and this is kind of our case with Dubsado, is your code grows, you have more stuff, and all of a sudden you have a bunch of files. And at a certain point, our production build, particularly on like a slower server, for example, could be over a minute, more, 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's just insanity to me. And so I heard about esbuild and then started exploring it, and then realized that was kind of, at least for now, looking like the best solution to this problem of just taking the exact same thing that Webpack is building and put it in a language that's actually fast, and then more importantly, parallelize it. Like, why does Webpack basically run everything on a single thread is wild. And so seeing the build times with esbuild, I've been super happy. Where all of a sudden, instead of having to do these like incremental builds, with esbuild, you can just run the whole thing. It's fast enough. And so I wanted to I'm a little bit frustrated even that Create React app still is suggesting, oh, hey, use Webpack, because it's just setting you up for eventual failure.
I'm actually kind of surprised, because we've had some esbuild related guests on the show too, and people that have used it. Like, everybody has positive things to say about it. I think nobody questions that it's not an order of magnitude faster. I almost wonder if for Create React app, if they have to worry about like backwards compatibility, or it's a enormously widely distributed and used thing, and people do like upgrade their Create React apps. So I imagine this would be a pretty enormous breaking change, because it seems like a no-brainer to me, but I also don't have to worry about all the work that goes into doing that and putting out documentation on it and whatnot. But I don't know. In my mind, that can be the only real reason, because esbuild just seems to be such a obvious slam dunk at this point.
Yeah.
You need to parallelize TypeScript type checking, though, if you want to do TypeScript in there. That's because the esbuild doesn't do the TypeScript checking, at least the last time I looked at it.
No, which to me is fine, because I've even realized now that as you're writing your code, it's already giving you all the warnings. And so when you go to do your build, unless basically your final CI build, run a final TypeScript check. But it's get me the output.js so I can just run it in the browser as quickly as possible.
And you can do parallel, right? You could actually run the TSC
exactly,
in another parallel job.
But just to cycle back on what you're saying about Create React app, is they can't do it because they have all these other people using it and they can't upgrade. It kind of comes back to my argument against Next.js is here we've found a clear, better solution, but they can't do it because the education and people are on it. And it's I don't want to be stuck with 1 minute, 2 minute builds at some point and have no control over changing that, basically.
Well, are you using Create React app for your project you're converting from Angular, or are you doing it more manually?
We have a whole custom build process that we built. And so,
all right, TJ, what's lightning round 2 here?
Lightning round 2. So you've got an article about giving up a cell phone for a month.
Okay, cool.
So what? I'll start by asking what prompted this. What made you want to bite the bullet?
Several things. I think cell phone addiction is probably the main one. Just finding yourself anywhere and you have 4 seconds, and in those 4 seconds your phone has somehow come out and you have clicked something, or not, you're just swiping on nothing. And so I started to realize that, and just wasn't particularly happy with it, and just felt like my whole life was in this little 4-inch device. And as well, on top of that, I was just kind of interested. I've heard about KaiOS. I don't know if you guys have heard of that.
No.
The name sounds familiar. It's lightweight, phone operating system.
Pretty much, yeah. So It's Nokia still releases feature phones. They're less popular in North America, obviously, but they've now become, I think it's the 3rd largest phone operating system in the world now. It's only maybe 3% or less. But they're sending out their operating system on feature phones. And so I was kind of interested in what's happening there. And so I figured I could tie the two together and say, well, the only way I'm going to do this is if I drop my smartphone completely. And so I did. I don't remember which came first, but I eventually gave my smartphone away. And so then I was forced to actually use this Nokia. And the first week was very interesting because you still the same device in your pocket, or you think it is. And so you're like, oh, well, I'm a little bit bored. What am I going to do? And you're like, you open this thing up and you're like, is there a browser? Yes. But it's so painful to go try to do anything
It's
that
Opera,
you just put it away. But then all of a sudden, the first few days, I kind of got over that initial hump. And all of a sudden, I felt human again. All of a sudden, it's kind of like, oh, well, I'm not just going to waste my time on this device. So let me plan something to do. I found myself with more energy. I woke up not worrying about, hey, what 16 notifications are going to be on my phone. And instead, hey, it's morning. Let's go eat. Let's just do something.
That's cool.
Interesting. It's KAIOS too, for anybody that's gonna Google this and check it out.
Well, on a tangential note with this, so I did wake up this morning. I was looking through my notifications, and one was for a Kotaku article on Diablo Immortal, which is this new version of Diablo for the phone. And they say that to level up a character, is potentially $100,000 to $500,000 of their charges. And I was like, are you out of your mind? That's the crazy, because I was like, oh, maybe I'll try this Diablo Immortal thing, because I actually have some time to kill every once in a while. And it's like, no, there's no way I'm going to ever. No, I'm good. I do not need to lose $500,000 into some game.
I will say, I've been tempted to do something like this because I think almost anybody listening can relate to the smartphone obsession. It really is a painful addiction. I will say one thing I've done that's helped me, that's not quite the cold turkey approach you took, is just drastically reducing the number of things that can notify me has helped me quite a bit. In uninstalling certain apps, I hadn't been using Facebook in forever, so I just got rid of it. I turned off notifications on Twitter because I figured, well, I'll check them periodically, right? But I don't need to know the second somebody says something to me. I'll get back to them. So really, I only have notifications on for things like messages, important things, and that's helped me quite a bit. I still have that tendency. I still use my phone more than I should, but I think even taking baby steps has helped me quite a bit, not feeling so attached. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe you'll encourage me to screen time too.
Yeah.
I would definitely encourage the cold turkey experience. It's painful, especially the first little while. I dropped off caffeine a while ago, and it's kind of similar feelings of, and that's when I knew it was an addiction, is when the first few days were uncomfortable. And that's how I know that something weirdly chemical was going on. And then once you kind of exit that, you can see what life is like without it. And then you see other people on their smartphones, and you see them in a totally different way. It's I went camping and people were on their smartphones. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, totally. I do want to do one more lightning round and then picks.
Yeah. So
here we go.
The last article I was going to ask you about, you have an article called 3 Lines of Code Shouldn't Take All Day. And I thought what was interesting about that is you've got some background in the gaming industry. And I feel like we could do an entire podcast about that, but maybe you'd just like to share some advice, because I thought the point out of that article was quite good. So maybe you want to give people the idea behind that, and then we'll link that one up too if people want to read through the whole thing.
Sure. How do I keep this lightning?
You can take a few minutes.
Okay. So the article's from a time when I worked at Electronic Arts on the FIFA team, and I joined there as a co-op, so essentially an intern. And obviously, I don't know much. That was my first time working in C++. First time working on a code base that large. So I knew nothing, and then worked on a fairly small team. And on top of that, there wasn't really kind of a formal, hey, here, get to know the entire code base. We were more kind of maintaining an older product. And so, first of all, for that part of the experience, there weren't many changes that we were making code-wise. And so I would kind of explore and learn it. But then later on, I returned as a full time, and that's when I really started writing code. And with consoles and even just game development as well, there's a huge build process that exists for one. And so you have just the build process alone, like a clean build. I forget exactly, but it's from nothing to build, it's probably an hour if everything is gets installed correctly. And then after that, your incremental build, you could be looking at, for the actual game itself, 10 seconds, maybe worse. But that's just to say, cool, your code compiled. Then it needs to deploy the game to the machine that you're going to run it on. Then the game by default has, here's all the screens you need to go through before you can get into the game. And then I work on a specific game mode. You got to go through, find the specific game mode you're going to. You've got a bug that's in the third season of career mode. And all of a sudden, how do you actually test that? And so the article focuses more kind of on the writing code side of things, but also just talks a bit about the tools that people eventually did build there. And they were there when I joined, so I don't know when they were actually built. But basically, we had a whole test bed where instead of running the game itself, you would just run effectively the logic, but in kind of a fake UI environment. So that code was just our code rather than the entire game code. And so you've got a much quicker compile there. And what's complicated with some of these scenarios is it's a bit harder to unit test because there's so many things that need to occur sometimes before you can make something happen, where certain decisions over here all of a sudden affected the output here. So you don't even know what to unit test because you haven't recreated the situation. And so what I was finding though is even with that, making a change could take kind of an entire day. And you get to the end of the day and you're like, well, I've only written 3 lines of code, which is kind of where it comes from. And I don't talk too much about this, but shortly after that, I switched over to web development. And it blew my mind how you're just cranking out new stuff just constantly and how easy that is. And that's something that I kind of wish that we could have had more of, because the ability to kind of quickly iterate on stuff like that and have confidence that things are working correctly is super important.
I think that plays nicely into a lot of your other stuff as well, like the esbuild, right? Just the faster you can see things, it's amazing. Obviously there's the extreme of taking an hour to do a full build, but even saving yourself seconds here or there, it's amazing how that can keep you in the right mindset, so you don't have to context shift because, well, if the build's running right, you're going to pick up your smartphone, you're going to
tie it all together.
Yeah, you're going to bring all your articles into
this
one.
guy's articles on my smartphone so I can flip through them, while I'm on the toilet. Anyway, so sounds like a good time to do some picks.
Hi, this is Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and lately I've been coaching some people on starting some podcasts and in some cases just taking their career to the next level. Whether you're beginner going to intermediate going to advanced, whether you're trying to get noticed in the community or go freelance, I've been helping these folks figure out how to get in front of people, how to build relationships, and how to build their careers and max out and just go to the next level. So if you're interested in talking to me and having me help you go to the next level, go to topenddevs.com/coaching. I will give you a 1-hour free session where we can figure out what you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, and figure out what the next steps are. And then from there, we can figure out how to get you to the place you want to go. So once again, that's topenddevs.com/coaching.
Mr. TJ, would you like to start us off with your pick for this week?
Sure. I'm going to pick Netlify functions, a little bit tech-related pick this week. I needed a very quick and dirty little serverless function thing. And I've always liked using Netlify for hosting web apps and such. And they're functions I had heard of, but I hadn't actually sat down and tried them. And it's actually kind of amazingly easy. You more or less create a functions folder in your web app. And then you could just create JavaScript files that they will deploy to magically make work in a serverless environment. So you can hit at the same URL your web app's running on. So if you just if you have an existing app and you just need a couple of like quick and dirty functions that need to run serverless, it's in my limited experience, I've got a day and a half working with them. So maybe I'll have to report back a little bit later. But at the very least, they've nailed the like getting started, getting up and running experience. They've done that.
Yeah, and the deploy times are crazy fast. Speaking of the whole like 3 lines and all day sort of thing.
You can test them locally very easily too, which is something I've struggled with some serverless stuff in the past. Like sometimes you can't like replicate production locally, and they've made that pretty darn easy, at least for my simple stuff. So that's my pick.
All right. Well, I am going to go with, I'm a huge Daishi Kato fan. And a while back, he released a book, Micro State Management with React Hooks. And I got it. And I was really struggling because I love Daishi and I love his content and I love his state managers and all that. But like the formatting of the code was absolutely terrible in the book. I mean, it was like every line was like separated. It was like this big gray bar with black text in it. So the contrast was low. And then there were these big like white bars in between. Really hard to read. And it's like just a simple on goal. Like you made the code hard to read in the book. Come on. And so they actually, to their credit, Pact actually went in and fixed it. And so now I can finally legit recommend this book, Micro State Management with React Hooks, which goes over a whole bunch of his cool state managers like Zustand and Jotai, and a lot of these ones that I've really been enjoying that are kind of alternatives to your Redux MobX hegemony, if you want to call it that. Even though I think Redux has improved a lot with the old Redux tool. All right, Adam, what's your pick?
My pick, I thought about it for a while and then I actually stumbled on a TV show recently and it's called Upload. It's on Amazon and it's science fiction, drama, comedy.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Right. The guy dies and then he goes, dies. Okay. And then he gets uploaded.
And then he gets uploaded to this kind of like digital afterlife. And it's got some interesting kind of commentary on where our society is maybe heading towards, and then as well as just kind of funny in some of the things that it makes dramatic that may or may not occur. And just I think the concept of consciousness and whether we can capture it in a digital version is interesting in itself. So I'm only a couple episodes in, but the concept I find interesting, and so I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes.
It's great, and season 2, as I recall, is really good too. So yeah, you'll enjoy it. All right, well, this is a great episode. Thank you so much, Adam, for showing up. Oh, and I'd like to actually make sure everyone knows that we have a Discord server, and we will have the link in the show notes where you can jump on our Discord server, go into our React Roundup channel, and ask us any questions or give us any comments you might have about the show or any suggestions you have. Always open to those cool ideas. All right. See you next time.
Cool. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, guys.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.